I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello, and welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm Connor Ruebusch. With me is Dr. Patrick Wyman, and as the title, the episode text, the description, and the promotion may have tipped you off, we are gathering here today to discuss the upcoming UFC 215, and as I'm sure many of our listeners know, that includes the now rescheduled rematch between Amanda Nunez and Valentina Shevchenko. Now, Pat, some listeners of ours might recall that the last time we discussed this fight, It got a little heated, so I want to make this introductory portion of the episode just a little time for us to exchange niceties and make sure that we respect each other as humans before we get back into discussing this all-important fight.
Get fucked, Connor.
Yeah, fuck you, you fucking weasel. Okay, so
I'm substantially less heated about this than I was last time.
Yeah, well, we're going to essentially be kind of recapping our analysis, maybe talking about if we've come to any other conclusions or if any other thoughts have occurred to us since we recapped this fight last time. But it was a fun discussion, and it's a fun fight. It's a great matchup that I'm happy to see them making again, even if it does seem like a little bit of a fuck you to the fight, to the fighters, because last time Nunez pulled out just before the event, and now she gets stuck on a card with Demetrious Johnson versus Ruebusch, another pair of fighters that Dana White's none too happy with. So it's kind of a fuck you card to the fighters, and that makes it a little bit of a moral issue to enjoy watching it, I guess. But the fight itself deserved to be remade, and those of us who care about the fights themselves will be tuning in to watch it for the same reasons we would have last time. In addition to that, just to tell people what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to do a few fights from UFC 215. We're going to start off with Nunez-Shevchenko, cover some of the undercard fights, and then get on to Demetrious Johnson versus Ruebusch for the flyweight crown. And then after that, near the end of the show, we are going to get to previewing some of this boxing flyweight card taking place at the StubHub Center, super flyweight card rather, because the card is called #Superfly. And that, of course, features three phenomenal super flyweight fights between Srisaket Rungvisai, who beat Roman Gonzalez, who was at the time most people's number one pound for pound, or at least a lot of people's number one pound for pound. And that was quite an upset, so now they're rematching. And it was also, by the way, a great fight. It was a really memorable back-and-forth contest, so that's good. Then we're moving on to Juan Francisco Estrada, one of my favorite boxer punchers, El Gallo. He's taking on Carlos Cuadras, who also gave Gonzalez a great fight. And Estrada gave Roman Gonzalez one of his toughest ever fights a few years ago. So possibly we're building towards a rematch between those two men. And then, of course, the monster Naoya Inoue is fighting on this card, taking on Antonio Nieves. And Inoue is basically the guy that every boxing fan wants to see, whether it's Gonzalez, whether it's Estrada, whether it's Lomachenko, whether it's Rigondeaux. If there's somebody who's impressive and they're below 135 pounds, people want Naoya Inoue to fight them. A young, impressive, dangerous fighter with a bright future. So we're going to get to all of those fights at the end of the show. Let's kick things off the way we said we would. Nunez versus Shevchenko, the rematch. How did our discussion of this last time go, Pat?
We got a little bit fired up about maybe some of our assumptions about how the rematch was going to look.
Because we have to say, to preface this, we have to make a lot of assumptions about how each woman does against a certain kind of struggle that we've seen them struggle with in the past.
Yeah, so basically the questions were Nunez's cardio and Shevchenko's output. And are either of those things fixable, and in what kind of fight will those kinds of flaws sink them? Mm-hmm. That is more or less what our argument revolved around. And I think after a couple of months to think about it, I think I am less sold on Nunez's ability to fight deep than I was last time. Like, I thought that there was a good reason to think that her cardio issues would be would not be so much of a problem moving forward. I think I don't know why I thought that at the time. I don't think that now. I still think she's going to beat Shevchenko.
Okay. Again, this is where a lot of the difficulty in coming to an agreement, which maybe that's the reason why our arguments stand out so much. We tend to agree on most things analytically, but it was really difficult to know what would happen because the narrative surrounding the first fight has now become, for a lot of people, Shevchenko would have finished Nunez. I don't think that's a completely ridiculous belief to have, to think that Shevchenko was going to keep winning rounds after that third, but as you very saliently pointed out last time we talked about this fight, Nunez came pretty close to getting Shevchenko out of there before that point. And it's not at all impossible that she could just stop Shevchenko before her stamina issues become a problem. Because Shevchenko is so very beatable in those early rounds if you put out enough volume, if you test her wrestling, if you make her work.
Yeah, what was really striking to me, because I went back and I rewatched some more Shevchenko here. So, and I did not re-listen to our previous discussion, so I'm not sure how much of this we covered.
Yeah.
But what is shocking to me is that I think if Nunez hadn't hurt Shevchenko, she could have continued to win a kind of a low output kickboxing match.
Yeah, well that's
for a couple more rounds.
Yeah, I think that was that's again an element that makes this difficult to predict, because Nunez's difficulties, I think they're kind of self-inflicted. So that's why it's always like she seems like she's just a step away from turning that corner and figuring out how to conserve her energy. But let's tie it into one of the most important fights that's ever happened. Much like Conor McGregor against Floyd Mayweather, I think the difficulty for her is she struggles to not capitalize on an opportunity. And Shevchenko is so slow-paced and takes so long to get going. I think the difficulty for Nunez is going to be seeing what appear to be opening after opening after opening and not putting 100% of finishing ability into every single one of them. That's why I think she gasses, because she certainly is capable physically of fighting 5 rounds, but she gasses because she just pours out her gas tank trying to get the kill in the first few.
This is something that we talked about last week when we were talking about Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather.
Right.
And I really do think that MMA as a sport incentivizes fighters to try to go for the kill all the time.
Yeah.
That in the grand scheme of things, fighters who pounce on every opportunity and really try to get the finish are likely to be rewarded for it.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean in the sense of winning fights. I also mean like it's going to help you build fans. It's going to help you win bonuses.
Sure.
It's going to help make you more marketable. That like this is a sport that really heavily incentivizes killer instinct and highlight real finishes.
You could even argue that the structure of the sport itself, like the way the game is played, incentivizes that, because in boxing you can knock somebody down and they'll get back up and be recovered. They have, approximately 13 seconds between the referee looking in their eyes and everything to clear their heads. In MMA, somebody can be not that badly hurt, but if they panic and cover up on the ground, you can get them out of there if you just go for it.
Exactly.
Like, it's a lot easier to reward yourself for just going, not just that MMA fighters are easier to knock out or something, but like you are rewarded by the officials for being over aggressive in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And so I would say Nunez is somebody who has great killer instinct to start with. And I think that she has learned those lessons about the structure of the sport pretty well, because for the most part, Nunez is going to be right. When she decides she's going to pour out her gas tank and go for the kill, most of the time she's going to be right. And the same is true for Conor McGregor. And I'm sure we could name fighter after fighter after fighter for whom that's going to be the case in MMA. Shevchenko is kind of the rare exception.
She's kind of the Floyd Mayweather in this matchup. She's kind of like the super efficient, super conservative. But we also talked in talking about McGregor Mayweather why some ways that MMA may make that a difficult style to use. Like boxing may be better designed for the like really specialist, really thoughtful, really cerebral, slow-paced fighters. In MMA, like you're going to give away a big portion of the fight with that style.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with Shevchenko, if you're not giving her stuff to work with, if you're not giving her data constantly, if you're not forcing her to do things, she just is not going to lead that much.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be somebody in the comments saying Shevchenko leads. Of course she leads. Well, yeah, she does, but not that often. She doesn't throw that much even when she does. If you're not throwing anything at her, if you're not giving her opportunities to counter, she'll throw maybe 7, 8, 9 strikes a minute.
A low kick here, a lead hook there. But the really important thing is that she's not going to hurt you with the shots that she leads with. Those aren't the ones that are going to like change the way you're approaching the bout.
No,
Yeah.
And that's not nothing. That's not no output, but it's not enough to reliably win rounds against solid competition, solid to excellent competition in MMA.
Yeah, someone like Nunez who is not only comfortable leading, but hurts people when she does.
Yeah, and when Nunez gets into the mode where she's just going to fight a slow-paced kickboxing match, like, she's pretty good at it.
Oh, yeah.
She's got a nice jab. She moves well. She's got good footwork, really sharp, tight footwork. She throws heavy low kicks. She knows how to throw scoring shots. Like, she wants to kill you and get you out of there. But up until that point, if she doesn't really see any openings, she will take what you give her.
Yeah, she's like... This is the thing, with just very different mindsets, but in terms of skills and physicality, Amanda Nunez is like a female Jose Aldo to me. She's got solid technique. She's got a lot of pop. She's very quick and explosive. She's got good footwork, and she's got that kicking game. Plus the underrated grappling and wrestling. She's still a lot more dangerous. She's a lot more like a younger Jose Aldo. But the battle for her is going to be in figuring out how to be an older Jose Aldo. You know what I mean? Like how to just spread out those. Like we could say maybe Nunez has 50 very hard, clean shots in her to land over the course of a 25-minute bout, or like 4 high energy takedowns or whatever. The mission for her in this bout is to figure out how to spread those 50 strikes out over the course of 25 minutes and fill the space between with enough stay busy work that Shevchenko can't steal around on just sort of technical proficiency and calmness. But that the mindset is where the matchup gets interesting, because Shevchenko's mindset is extremely calm. Even when Nunez was close to finishing her, I don't think she was really badly shaken, and she came out in the third round very poised. The double-edged sword for her being that she has difficulty pushing the pace because she's so used to this sort of relaxed, slow type of fighting. And then, of course, as we've said, Nunez mentally, the challenge is controlling herself. It's really a matter of, like, is she going to win or is she going to let Shevchenko beat her? Not that Shevchenko's not going to take the fight from her or whatever, but that's kind of how it feels. You know what I mean? Like, if Shevchenko wins, it'll be because Nunez screwed up. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's,
if she wins, it's not going to be because she takes the fight to Nunez and just purely out-techniques her. She might clip her with a perfect counter or something. But really, it's going to be because if Shevchenko wins, it'll be because Nunez slowed down. And if she slows down, I think you and I agree that that's essentially a mistake she doesn't necessarily have to make.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And that's not to take anything away from Shevchenko if she does in fact win that way, because the patience to wait out a mercurial fighter like Nunez is in itself a skill.
Of course.
Like that represents a pretty strong accomplishment to weather a storm, to draw out ill-advised shots from an opponent. I think that's really the key to this fight is you mentioned those 50 hard shots. I think that's about right. I think that's really almost exactly what Nunez can afford to throw while mixing in some lighter shots. Like, I think that's exactly right. So if you're Shevchenko, your game plan needs to be, how do I get Nunez to throw those 50, or maybe it's more, maybe it's 75, or maybe it's fewer, maybe it's 25. How do I get Nunez to throw all those shots foolishly early?
Yeah.
So really that should be her game plan.
Sure. Do you think Shevchenko can do that?
I think she can. I don't think she will. And I think this comes back to what we were talking about when we got so heated the last time, is I am not sure that Shevchenko has it in her. And this is the kind of the strategist's gambit that we've talked a lot about with fighters like Lomachenko and with McGregor and with Mayweather, that and with John Jones too, especially, that sometimes you need to put yourself at risk to win, to give yourself a better chance of winning the fight and minimize your risk over the long run. And I just don't think Shevchenko has that in her. I have not really ever seen anything from Shevchenko that makes me think she's going to be willing to take nasty shots to create the strategic context that's going to give her the best chance of winning down the road.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that. You might disagree, and I think maybe there are things that I'm missing, maybe there are things that I'm forgetting, but I think she would much rather play a shot or two at a time, and if Nunez gasses, then Nunez gasses. But I don't think that Shevchenko was going to really work hard to put her in position to gas out.
That's the thing with Shevchenko. We've been saying since she made her way to the UFC, she's basically the fighter she is. She goes out there, she has a hard time doing something that is not the thing she's been training to do for most of her life. And I think, you know what I would like to see? The one thing I think Shevchenko could add to her game that would make me very confident she could win here, because even with, yes, the high risk of Nunez finishing her early, you know, like the chances of Nunez putting Shevchenko away with a single shot, as they are in any elite fight, but especially against a very good striker, they're pretty slim. She's probably going to have to finish her, and that may be where she runs into trouble, or where she decides to pull back and save it for the next chance she has to knock Shevchenko down or whatever. But I think if Shevchenko came into this fight and just threw like 30% more body shots, I would really easily favor her, because the chances of Nunez finishing her in that scenario, in a fight in which Shevchenko is plugging away at the body consistently, just teeping, jabbing, just touching over and over, that would be enough for me to think that Shevchenko would win the last 3 rounds, because that would assure that Nunez would tire, or would at least give Nunez enough things to respond to that she might tire herself, in addition to the body work. But again, like, Shevchenko is who she is. So it's weird, because it's kind of, in a strange way, it's a fight in which if either woman showed us something we've not seen, like, either woman just has to show us one thing we haven't seen from them before to change the way we view them going forward. But if they both just show up as themselves, it's like a 50-50 fight. So it's really hard to call. I'm going to stick with Shevchenko as my pick. I think that Nunez is going to end up going for the kill and will slow herself down before the end of round 3. And I think in that scenario, I do have to assume that Shevchenko can fairly comfortably win rounds against a tired Nunez. But I mean, we're kind of back where we started when we first talked about this fight, right? It's just very hard to say who's going to screw up and in which way, even though I think we both have a good handle on how these women tend to succeed and or screw up.
Yeah, I think that Nunez is either going to finish her, or Nunez is going to get stuck in a low output kickboxing match that, frankly, Nunez is defensively sound enough that I don't think she's going to run into stupid shit.
Yeah.
Like into like real obvious counters.
Sure.
And if she can draw Shevchenko into exchanging in layers, then I think that actually favors Nunez.
Yeah.
Or this version of Nunez, as opposed to the one that fought her the first time.
Yeah, if Nunez just doesn't gas, like, she can find a way to fight that she just doesn't slow down. I think she could win 25 minutes of kickboxing with Shevchenko if she fought at a slower pace, because her shots are going to count more. And she's not Holly Holm. She's not going to get caught by the same counter over and over again, or telegraph the same attack over and over again. She's a good technical fighter, Amanda Nunez. She's got some diversity to her game.
Yeah. So I think that there are just too many. I think Nunez just offers too many threats, especially if she can get her down again and get on top. Like, I think that's a real bad spot for Shevchenko to be in.
For sure.
I think that she can reliably take her down if she doesn't gas herself out, like trying to finish from top position like she did in the first fight. I just think that there are enough things that Nunez does well that she's either going to finish early, or she's going to grind out enough of the fight and weather enough of the storm later when Shevchenko inevitably gets going a little bit, that it's going to be Nunez's fight.
Just go fuck yourself. Pat? So just to catch our listeners up on what happened during that abrupt pause in the episode, I told Pat to go fuck himself, and he hung up on me. So the wounds have not healed. They really have not healed. But I did.
Jesus Christ.
I'll say I felt like if Amanda Nunez like goes for the kill and then realizes she's gassed, that's how I felt after I said that. There was just this long silence. My good friend Pat said nothing in response. It's like, he knows I'm joking, right? I didn't hurt his feelings, I hope. I mean, we're just playing around.
Jeez.
Okay, so Nunez Shevchenko 2. That's that. Do you want to try to get to one of these undercard fights before we wrap this segment?
Absolutely. So let's talk real quick about Neil Magny versus Rafael dos Anjos.
Sure. Yeah. Which
so
was
what are your
apparently
thoughts on this matchup, Connor?
Apparently, they may have done RDA versus Woodley if Maya hadn't taken the shot. So they're trying to push RDA in this welterweight division. I think this is a pretty good matchup for RDA, if I'm honest. There's a lot of things that Neil Magny does well, but a lot of Neil Magny's game is capitalizing on other people's mistakes, is sort of surviving the early onslaught and finding his way into the fight. And often that is predicated on being a better wrestler and, more importantly, being a better top position grappler than his opponents. And I don't think he's going to have any of those usual advantages here against RDA. He's kind of fighting a slightly worse Damian Maia, who is way scarier on the feet. And I have to favor Dos Anjos in that matchup. How do you feel about it?
I would feel better about Magny's chances if he were a better defensive wrestler.
Sure, yeah.
I think that there is a game plan on the feet here where he just manages to finally puts together his reach into a coherent package and kind of like sticks and moves and just like tosses his jab out there over and over and over again and like manages to kind of frustrate a guy that he's 6 inches taller than and should have like a substantial reach advantage. That's possible. Though I think that Dos Anjos's leg kicks are going to make up for that. Mm-hmm. I think his kicking game, because we've seen that before from guys who have tried, like where Magny has tried to stick them on the outside and they've just kicked the hell out of his legs. Mm-hmm. Like Eric Silva did that. That was a fight Magny won, but Eric Silva just did terrible things.
Yeah, Magny had to work hard too. He had to work hard to get back into it. It was like many of his fights, a bad first round for him.
Yeah, Lorenz Larkin just, my God, that was disgusting what he did to his legs.
Yeah.
So.
And Magny, too, like, that is possible, but I feel comfortable saying this. As far as UFC fighters go, Magny's probably the best tall, long fighter with the worst jab. Like, as far as keeping a good jab on his opponents consistently, does he compare to other people in this division, even like Sean Strickland in that regard? I don't think so. Does he compare to, like, the Gustafsons and the Volkovs of the world even? No, not really. His striking is not his, weirdly, because he used to be like a sprawl and brawl guy, but his striking is not the lanky, long-range boxing you would expect from a guy with his frame. Instead, he tends to get back to the defense. Like, he's a little more Struve than he is Volkov, you know what I'm saying? On the feet.
Yeah, it's strange because it's not like he has bad striking coaches. He's been at it for a while. By all accounts, he's a guy who's always in the gym.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, he's just not organic with it. But if you know, like, not being organic with your strikes is not the worst thing in the world. There are plenty of really good rote strikers. Mm-hmm. It's something that we've talked about a lot in the past, like guys who just drill combinations over and over again and then they throw them and then that's good. And like, that's fine.
Sure.
Because you know logically what is supposed to follow that shot, even if you're not reading things as they're happening.
But Magny's not a doer. He's not organic, but he's also definitely a thinker. Like, he does think about what he's doing all the time. And that becomes a problem when you're not comfortable at range.
Yeah, and that works well for him on the ground because he's very clearly thinking 1, 2, 3 steps.
And it works well for him whenever he gets past the first round because he's compiled some information on his opponent. Mm-hmm. Like Neil Magny, this is, again, the difference between MMA and boxing. If this was the environment of boxing in, like, the 30s, Magny would probably be one of those, like, Black Murderers Row type fighters who fights, like, dozens of times a year and just nobody finishes him, nobody beats him up. You can beat him, but he's going to make it frustrating because eventually he's going to figure out some ways to attack openings and get to where he's good. But in a 3-round fight where you are guaranteed basically with that style to lose the first round against somebody as well-rounded and dangerous as RDA, it's a tough matchup. And especially because even if Magny did come out with that rangy boxing, I think we've realized that Dos Anjos is really at his worst when you push forward and make him back up, or when it's a range boxing match. So even somebody who's good at constantly creating space, RDA's favorite thing to do is to eat space. So it's still going to be the style of fight in which he is comfortable and not the style of fight in which Magny is comfortable.
Yeah, I would just look for RDA to... RDA is going to get hit, I think. I think he's going to get hit a fair amount. He's going to have to eat some shots. But I think in the process, he's going to land so much harder and so many more. And he's going to find opportunities to get in on the hips and take Magny down. And, like, I really, unless he gets stuck with his back to the fence over and over with Magny wearing on him in the clinch and using his height and leverage, then, which is possible. That's possible. I think it's going to be real hard. It's real hard for me to see Magny winning this fight, or alternatively, RDA's chin finally gives out once and for all, and Magny just catches him clean with something and manages to pour it on. But that also seems unlikely. This seems like a fight that's tailor-made for RDA to take a step up.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Although, like, I love Neil Magny, even if his fights aren't always the most fun, it's always entertaining to me to watch him try to figure out how to beat such a wide, diverse array of opponents, since he fights so frequently, too. So I'll be happy if Magny wins. But it just does not seem like a favorable fight for him. So that's that for that one. When we come back, we are going to talk about Demetrious Johnson versus Ray Borg, the main event of UFC 215 for the flyweight title, as I'm sure you know. And then we are also going to get into another bout from this undercard. There's actually two that we're looking at here, but I think we settled on the featherweight fight between Gavin Tucker and Rick Glen. Am I right about that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Gavin Tucker, Rick Glen, Johnson Borg, and then the Superfly card after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And we are back. Pat hung up on me a couple more times in that interim, but we've sorted things out. We're over Shevchenko Nunez. It's officially behind us until the fight happens, at which point, of course, the podcast will end with one of us taking over as the new permanent host, because it's a loser leaves town match for the two of us. I think that's sort of a tacit agreement we've come to.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Demetrious Johnson, Ray Borg, flyweight championship. There's a reason we started with Nunez Shevchenko before this, and it's not because Demetrious Johnson is not the greatest fucking fighter in the world, but it's because it's a Demetrious Johnson fight. You know what I mean? Like in a certain aspect, we kind of have to understand why Johnson's fights don't sell that much, because there's just not enough time for anyone in the division. Like, I think Ray Borg could be a very good challenger to Demetrious Johnson, but there's always this feeling that nobody who fights him these days is ready. They're just not ready yet, because like you get a 2-fight win streak over some top 10 guys, and you're fighting Demetrious Johnson. You're fighting the pound for pound number one. I don't know. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, and also we know that those of you who like Demetrious Johnson enough to listen to this will listen through Shevchenko Nunez, yes, whereas the reverse is not true.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Like it's weird to just put it out there like that, but that's legitimately true.
Yeah.
So there. Now that we've put our cards on the table,
a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Connor. If you were Ray Borg or Ray Borg's coaches, we've talked to Ray Borg's coaches. We know who's cornering him. We have a pretty good idea for how they're going to approach the fight. How would you train Ray Borg for this fight? What would you have him try to do to beat the unbeatable Demetrious Johnson?
I would have him pressure, or at least, which doesn't necessarily mean coming forward all the time, but I would have sort of an idea of this is the distance you have to be from Johnson at all times, with the sub rule being that you are not going to allow your back to come near the fence, and you are not going to tie up in the clinch if you get him to the fence. So you're going to shoot at his hips and go for a clean takedown to work your ground game. You're not going to tie up with him for any period of time on the feet. That's about it. Be aggressive, or at least put mental pressure on him with range, with feints, counter when he throws, and try to force him back at all costs. Do not let him force you into the fence.
That sounds about right.
Is that about it? I mean, you don't want to get pressured by Demetrious Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, so it was kind of a trick question, because we know how Brandon Gibson and Greg Jackson approach fights.
Yeah.
And in particular, one of the things that we've talked about with Greg Jackson is that he looks at the basis of his strategic approach is trying to find nodal points in a fighter's game, where if you avoid those points, it could be something as simple as a particular position in the clinch, or a particular range on the feet, or a particular angle,
yeah,
or a particular space in the cage. That if you avoid those points, then you avoid most of what makes that fighter so dangerous.
Yeah.
Like Holm Rousey was a great example of this, where there were really just like three things that they had to train Holly to avoid. One of them was getting her back cut against the fence. Another was letting Rousey's hips get below hers in the clinch, and then the third was like on the ground. If Rousey goes for an armbar here, you avoid this particular position that leads to most of Rousey's armbar finishes.
Yeah,
it was like that was it.
It's
like
all about
three things.
finding a strategy that undermines the other person's game. It takes away their launch pads basically from which the rest of their game springs.
Exactly, and those could be really simple things. Like it doesn't have to be some like tremendously complex thing. It's like if you just avoid these 3 points that fracture off into everything else that this fighter does well, then you're going to have a good chance. The problem is Demetrious Johnson kind of breaks that way of approaching strategy.
Right.
You know, this is going to be Jackson and Gibson's third crack at Demetrious Johnson. And
it means that like the only way to strategize for Demetrious Johnson is to come up with a strategy that has way more layers and different paths down which it can diverge. It's very like it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy or like a self-defeating matchup to accept, because you're basically saying I'm going to outthink Demetrious Johnson,
which is not possible.
Doesn't seem like it. Yeah. Like I'm going to catch him or I'm going to outthink him.
Yeah. So that makes me think that the way to approach this is, rather than trying to out-strategize, is to maximize your chances of catching him.
Maybe. Yeah.
So I think that's the right way to approach for Ray Borg. Maybe not necessarily for everybody. If you're Dominic Cruz, maybe you could go out there and strategize with Demetrious Johnson.
Yeah.
And have a good chance. Like I think that right now would be a fascinating matchup.
And as I said, I think Ray Borg in a few years, or with a few like 5 more fights under his belt, could also be somebody who could maybe do that. Like he's already made some nice leaps. He's only 24 and is a great athlete with a lot of potential. It's just that like who did Ray Borg beat to get this fight? He lost 2 fights ago to Justin Scoggins, and then he beat Louis Smolka, who was on a losing streak, and he beat Jussier Formiga, who is good, but not impossible to outthink, or not nearly as difficult to outthink and plan for as Demetrious Johnson is. There's just like nothing Borg has seen prepares him for the different mental stratosphere that Mighty Mouse occupies.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that Borg does well that I think could be a lot of trouble for Johnson, at least at first. Mm-hmm. The first one is Borg is really good at throwing as another guy throws, because he's so fast. He can spot you throwing and throw at the same time. He's really good at keying in on a trigger. So that is actually something that's going to serve him really well. That's one of the things that Johnson that is a legitimate weakness in Johnson's game, because every strike is just it is just a means to an end rather than an end in itself. Mm-hmm. You can catch Johnson as he's doing something, because he's probably already thinking like 3 steps down the road from you.
Yeah.
Like a low kick for Demetrious Johnson, I don't think is so much a strike that's meant to hurt you as it is a thing that he's doing in order to serve a larger purpose. And that's what makes him so brilliant. But sometimes if you're throwing something that is just one piece in a much larger puzzle, your opponent can just key in on that and hit you while you're throwing a low kick, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's something that Borg does very well, and it's something that suits his physical gift. It suits his speed. It suits his power. It suits his kind of innate timing that he has. So I think that's one thing that he could do. Every time Demetrious Johnson throws, you throw at exactly the same time as he does.
Yeah, I think that's a good thought.
You can try to catch Johnson as he circles, as he is on his way to doing something else. You can try to catch him as he pivots out, because Johnson, that's when Johnson does his thinking, is while he's on the way to doing something else.
Yeah, he uses those resets to plan his next move.
Exactly. And while he's planning, you can hit him.
Yeah.
So, and then I think you just pray that one of those does enough to him that you can kind of that it's enough to create an opportunity to finish.
Yeah, well, right, like the genius of Demetrious Johnson's game is that it's not just like you could just say broadly he doesn't settle into one kind of fighting, and that's true. We have talked many times about his excellent adaptability, but it's also that he makes it very difficult for you to know like when the next aspect of your game plan is coming into play. When your opportunity, like say you go into the fight, you're like, okay, I'm going to try to catch him on breaks. That's one of my main strategic focuses. I'm going to catch him on the break. When's the break coming? When's he going to engage? How is he going to engage? Demetrious Johnson even when he's not walking people down, puts a ton of pressure on his opponents because he's always willing to change up the way that he comes in, or to be way more aggressive or way more defensive, to try to wrestle, to tie you up this time when you step in. You basically get, like, the first time you take a swing at Demetrious Johnson with a right hook as he pivots out to your right, you know, as he takes that left pivot, that's like, you better get it, because if you don't, it's like now he's seen it. That was the problem with McGregor against Mayweather. Like, now he knows what your move is. He knows what opening you're trying to capitalize on, and next time that opening might not be there, or he might give you the opening waiting for you to attack it. Like, that's the thing. There's so many layers of thought going on when Demetrious Johnson fights. It's so hard to ever, like, you're never ahead of him when you start. How do you get ahead of him?
You can't get ahead of him.
It's hard.
And the second that and I think that maybe the key to realize is that if you try to play that game with him, then you're sunk.
Yeah.
You know?
So maybe Borg should give it his all from the opening bell. Just go for it.
Yeah, I think that's really all you can do. It just reminds me so much of you've seen Star Trek First Contact, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you know when they, like, the Borg are on the Enterprise. Sorry, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen a movie that's not, I think, 21 years old. Yeah. The Borg are on the ship, and Worf says, "I estimate that at most we'll have 10 shots until they adapt." And that's basically the case with Demetrious Johnson.
Yeah,
you're going to get about 10 good shots at him before he figures out what you're doing.
Is this what it's like being a historian? How did you find a teachable moment from such a mediocre movie as Star Trek?
First of all, that wasn't a mediocre movie.
Yes,
Connor.
it is. Let's take the Next Generation cast and put them in an action movie. Awesome.
It was fucking awesome. Like, Patrick Stewart was looking great in that movie. 50-something years old. Look at his arms, man.
Yeah, he's jacked, and he likes to show it off. He twists on an undershirt just so he can show off that he's ripped for 50. But also, Jean-Luc Picard, not an action star.
That was awesome. That was awesome. Okay. James Cromwell, awesome.
All right. Okay. All right. This will be another show-breaking. This will be
Alfred Woodard, man.
This could end up another show-breaking feud. So, Johnson over Borg, right?
In here.
I mean, you think Borg is just gonna go after Johnson? Do you have, like, a feeling on how he's going to approach this fight?
I think that he's going to look surprisingly good for about 4 minutes.
Sure. Yeah, I think so too.
And I think also because at this point, it seems to me Johnson is not quite as blindingly fast as he was about 4 years ago, when he was, 25, 26?
You compare him now to, like, when he fought Dominic Cruz. The blitzing that he was able to do in that fight. He's still probably one of the very fastest fighters on earth, but not quite.
He's just not quite as fast. He makes, and like a lot of older fighters, he makes up for it with better timing.
Yeah.
Like there are ways around it, but I don't think there's no doubt in my mind that Johnson is not quite as physically as physically quick as he was a few years ago.
And the first step for a guy like Borg is overcoming the aura as well. It's just coming in there and knowing, like, it's always a surprise when somebody has a good round against somebody with the reputation of Demetrious Johnson, because his reputation is a big part of how he's able to be so dominant over everyone. Because nobody goes into the cage thinking they're going to beat him. They all have doubts, more doubts than most challengers do when they fight your average champion.
That's one thing where I think that Gibson and Jackson will have Borg prepared for that.
Yeah,
I think that they will have him prepared for the aura. I think they will have him confident stepping into the cage, and that's why I think he's going to do real well at first. And because what Borg does, like, he is so fast.
Yeah. Like,
Borg, I think, is the fastest fighter in this division. I think he's got some of the best natural and trained timing in the division. I think he's got the best natural sense for how to transition. He's incredible.
I think he hits pretty hard too. Like, as his striking improves, he's got some pop. He's definitely an explosive fighter.
Yeah, and I think that is, against a possibly slowing Demetrious Johnson, is going to give him 3, 4, 5 minutes where he can figure things, where he can
while Johnson is figuring
things out.
Right. Yeah. I think that I'm glad you brought up Jackson and Gibson. I think that might be the most interesting angle on this fight, because overcoming that sense of unease, that foreboding feeling you have when you're like, oh, I'm about to fight the consensus #1 mixed martial artist on the planet. The best way to do that is to make that fear appear entirely irrational, to approach it logically and say, look, he's the same as any other fighter, just like any other guy with this style, here are the ways in which he's weak. Here are the things we're going to do to win. A very rational, strategy-based approach to a fighter that most people view as like you can't game plan for him. They see him as unstrategizable. So I think that is something. And I do agree. I think Borg is going to have moments early here where he's going to surprise Johnson a little bit. But it's all a matter of making hay with that before Johnson gets his reads and figures things out. And that's a tall order.
Yeah, I think eventually what's going to happen is what happens to a lot of guys whose real strength is their transitions. Eventually, Johnson is going to stick Borg in one phase of the fight. It could be any phase. It could be striking. It could be wrestling. It could be grappling. I think it's most likely to be in the clinch because I think that's where a lot of these things are going to end up, either after Borg shoots or after Johnson shoots and gets stuffed, or because of cage positioning. One of those things I think is going to end up with them in the clinch. I think they're eventually going to get stuck there, but it could be any of them. It doesn't really matter. It could just be an extended striking match. It could just be an extended grappling match. They could just be scrambling and wrestling. Eventually, Johnson has so much more depth of skill in every single one of those areas that if you don't let Borg go back and forth between them, he doesn't have the depth of skill to compete.
Because that's where Borg's athletic ability is its greatest advantage, or is at its most potent, I guess, because he can surprise you when you're in the between moves. He can catch you faster than other people can catch you.
He did that so well against Jussier Formiga. He was hitting so many great shots on breaks. He was really clever about dictating when they got into the clinch, because Formiga's a good clinch fighter. And so when Henry Cejudo fought Formiga, he really had to kind of like use raw horsepower to beat him in the clinch. Borg beat Formiga in the clinch by dictating how and when they got into the clinch. It was totally different. They both beat Formiga there, but Cejudo eventually, it was like his greater depth of skill and greater athletic ability and raw strength that did it. With Borg, it was because he was always the one deciding when and how they were going to get there. Like, he always had the underhook. He always had the collar tie. He always had the position that was going to allow him to land the shot on the exit that he wanted. Like, it was really, really fucking smart. Like, it was really impressive work. But if you just got stuck in the clinch with Demetrious Johnson, it doesn't matter what kind of shot you have planned on the break if you don't get to a break. And it doesn't matter how clever your entry from a 1-2 to a takedown is if you never get to go for that takedown. If you're just stuck throwing 1-2s against Demetrious Johnson, he's going to eat you alive.
You don't get the reaction you need from the 1-2, so he sees the takedown coming after it. Then what is the 1-2 good for? And if that's all you're left with, and you expect it to set up the takedown, you get into that running out of ideas phase that we've seen from a lot of fighters.
I think that's my prediction is we get there about 2 minutes into round 3, and Johnson finishes Borg in round 3 or round 4.
Sounds about right to me. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think a round 4 finish for Demetrious Johnson sounds about right. So, UFC 215. That's about it for us as far as that card.
Did you want to talk real quick about Gavin Tucker and Rick Glen?
Oh, yeah, of course. Gavin Tucker, Rick Glen, I almost just moved on. We wanted to talk about this fight above all the others because it's going to be an exciting fight. Both Pat and I like Rick Glen. We were both excited when he was signed to the UFC. And Gavin Tucker, I mean, everyone who saw that debut was excited that he had signed with the UFC. Watching him entertainingly style on Sam Sicilia for 3 thrilling rounds. What do you make of this matchup?
I think it is going to be a real quick-paced, lot of skill, surprisingly deep skill on the feet kind of fight. Like the thing I love about guys like Tucker and Glen, they're both dudes who had a lot of experience on the regional scene. They've been fighting for quite a while. Like, so you can just throw them in. You don't need to do like softballs. Like, you give them fights against good opposition, and it's like sink or swim time because they're not like 20-year-olds who have been fighting for 2 years. Like Ray Borg, when he debuted in the UFC, was just unbelievably raw. Like these dudes are not that. They have a lot of depth of skill. They've been in the game for a long time. Like Rick Glen had his first professional fight, I think, in 2006. Yeah. Like, dude's a veteran, even though he's not very old. I think he's only 28 or 29.
Yeah. Tucker's a lot less experienced, but he's 31.
Yeah, but those fights are scattered over a long period. I think he started fighting in 2010 or 2011.
2011.
2011. Yeah. Okay. So both of these dudes are like they're prime fighters. They're good to go. And what that means is that we're going to get a lot of layers to this fight.
Yeah.
Like they both know how to do a lot of different things at a high level of skill. And so, but they're very stylistically different. Like Tucker is not a big dude for the division. He's got pop. He's really, really fast. Glen, not nearly as fast, but really long, clever, nasty in the clinch, good elbows, nice knees, uses his height to frame and leverage really well, and durable. So I think we're going to get 3 rounds at a high pace in kind of a back and forth seesaw type fight.
Yeah, and ultimately I think that probably Gavin Tucker's like speed and aggression are going to be the difference. I think he has the ability to kind of just step in and out with flurries of attacks or with surprising pot shots or whatever, that Glen's sort of a little more cumbersome long arm build is not going to be able to keep up with. That's my feeling, that Tucker is ultimately going to wind up sort of running circles around Glen and picking him off when Glen is trying to play catch up. But
yeah,
it'll also get interesting because late in the fight is also when Glen tends to be at his best. He tends to come forward and just throw with reckless abandon and look to mix things up at every opportunity. So even if Tucker builds towards that kind of fight, we are probably still in for a relatively back and forth third round if it gets that far. So I think it's a great matchup.
That sounds right, especially because Glen has a background as a boxer. I think he did some amateur boxing, and Glen works the body really well. He will invest early in the fight. This is that's how he eventually beat when he fought Georgi Karakhanyan back in old World Series of Fighting. Like he beat up his body early and eventually cracked his ribs. Like that's Glen is a guy who's going to do that. He invests in body work. So
that would be a wise tack against Tucker.
Yeah, if you're Tucker and you're winning early rounds, taking apart Rick Glen's head while he works your body, like you got to be careful because come the third round, like your gas tank could be running real low. And Tucker's style is very energy intensive. So, but that's a lot of layers to an undercard featherweight fight. I think that's part of the reason why we both like it.
Yeah, like in a fight that also like not just layers, but it promises to be exciting to look at too. Not just a tactical battle, but one with lots of violence. So, yeah, even though it's the first fight on the Fox Sports 1 prelims, to me it looks like one of the best matchups in the card as far as action and intrigue are concerned. So, that one out of the way. Now we're done with our discussion of UFC 215. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to try to quickly run through the Superfly card featuring those fights between Roman Gonzalez and Srisaket Sorungvisai, a rematch there. Juan Francisco Estrada versus Carlos Cuadras, both past opponents of Roman Gonzalez, are both very good at what they do. And the monster, Naoya Inoue, defends his WBO title against Antonio Nieves. All of that after this break. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back. Segment number 3, the thing everyone tunes into this show to hear, boxing analysis. This is our mission, Pat, is to sell our mostly MMA-based audience of fans on the most interesting things happening in the world of boxing. That's usually when we decide to talk boxing, it's because something really fucking cool is about to happen or did just happen.
I'm going to quote the great TV show, The Newsroom, at you, Connor, and I'm going to say, we're on a mission to civilize.
The great Newsroom guides us in all things.
It does. It does indeed.
I keep a picture of Jeff Daniels next to my bed. He has like an aureola around his head.
Apologies to those of our listeners who really are big fans of The Newsroom, but yeah, that's
yeah. Okay, so we want to kick things off the right way. We're going to talk about the Gonzalez fight first. We already talked briefly about the first fight between these men. You will find, of course, Srisaket Sorungvisai listed on BoxRec as Wizak Silwangek because I think that's his given name, but Thai boxers, like Muay Thai fighters from Thailand, fight under their gym's names and an assumed name. So Srisaket Sorungvisai is the guy who upset Roman Gonzalez in his last fight, gave him his first ever loss. He was 46-0 heading into that fight, and had not been beaten since he debuted in 2005. And so that was quite an occurrence, but it's not as if Rungvisai demonstrated that Gonzalez is done. He didn't make him look bad. He just gave him a great fight and had a very interesting sort of awkward southpaw style for him to deal with. Do you suspect that Gonzalez will have an easier time adapting to that style in the rematch now that he's seen it once?
What I think is it's a miracle that, and a testament to Sor Rungvisai's toughness, that he was able to fight the fight that he did.
Sure.
And win. So what occurred to me on the rewatch, I don't know if I noticed this so much live the first time I was watching it, was Sor Rungvisai basically just fought a Roman Gonzalez fight.
Yeah.
In that he engaged him at the ranges where Gonzalez's opponents usually try to avoid it. He just met him head on. He just went strength versus strength with him.
Yeah.
And said, I think I'm bigger, I think I'm tougher, I think I hit harder shot for shot, and I'm not going to get tired. I'm just going to throw with you. And that was kind of enough. It took what that did was the early rounds when Chocolatito starts to gather momentum like a snowball rolling downhill. Mm-hmm. He stopped Chocolatito's momentum over and over and over again. And like, I think that was really hard for Gonzalez to deal with, that he was so used to. Go ahead.
He's used to getting into a roll before too long, and he never the snowball just kept getting pushed back up to the top of the hill.
Yeah, and the way that Chocolatito does that is by always having the last word in an exchange. Like you throw at Chocolatito, he throws back at you, you throw back at him, he throws back at you, and the way that he gains that sense of momentum is by always having the last word, by always being the last one throwing. Mm-hmm. Like watch Gonzalez's fights. When he starts to be the one who gets the last word, then the fight starts turning in his direction. Right. And you see this pattern over and over and over again. So Rungvisai just never let him do that. He was always like, okay, you throw at me, I'm going to throw back over and over again, over and over and over again. And that stopped Gonzalez from getting the kind of momentum that he usually does. If Gonzalez is going to win this fight, or I guess if Sor Rungvisai is going to win the rematch, if we put the onus on him again, he needs to do the same thing, basically, because that's the cornerstone of Gonzalez's style. I just wonder if he's going to be able to do that without gassing or getting hurt at some point.
Yeah, and I also have a feeling that Gonzalez might come into this fight willing to stall or willing to forestall that snowball moment a little bit longer than he normally is. I think he came in and he was surprised that the momentum just didn't build slowly from the very beginning. But Gonzalez can be a good defensive fighter who fights at a slow pace and just makes you miss. I've watched some sparring. People who know me know that there are a few things in the world I love more than watching pro fighters sparring. And Gonzalez's sparring even looks like his fights. Like, he goes into the sparring ring and his opponent will try to pick him off and jab him, and he comes forward, but he doesn't really try to fight with him much until he figures out that he's timed their jab, or whatever the weapon is that they're trying to catch him with. He's got it. He's not too worried about it. Now he can start countering it. Now he can start leading. And then, so basically what you're saying is I think the whole way that Gonzalez fights is by constantly just punishing you for trying to do things to him. That you never get to just comfortably win and exchange. I think that same mentality and that same approach can also work if he just does not give Sor Rungvisai the same engagements as often. If he just kind of keeps a bit of distance, keeps a jab on him, and more slowly and methodically builds. Because the difference there is that instead of just figuring out the one thing that Sor Rungvisai wants to do and punishing him for it, he needs to give Sor Rungvisai that feeling of, I'm losing these exchanges, I need to do something, before he has any moments of big success. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think that Gonzalez, with that in mind, could also invest more in the body early.
For sure.
I always feel like Gonzalez, while he's a really good body puncher, it's incidental to him.
Yeah.
Like, it's a way of mixing up the target location. It's a means of opening up headshots.
Yes.
And if it wears his opponent down, simply because, he's going to land more body shots than a normal fighter does, simply because he's throwing so many more, not because he's throwing an inordinate percentage of his shots to the body.
Right. You don't think of him as a body puncher.
Exactly. So I think, but when he does it, he's a nasty body puncher.
For sure.
He really digs. He throws good shots. So I think if he's a little more willing to throw 2, 3, 4 shots to the body in a row, just dig in, that could serve him well. And it could make it impossible for Sor Rungvisai to fight the kind of fight that he did the first time.
Yeah.
So I think the rematch, I would say, favors Gonzalez.
Just stylistically,
I kind of expect him to win.
It was a surprise to all of us, and it was a surprise to Gonzalez. He lost the last fight, and again, it's not as if he was made to look bad. It was just that somebody had the right obstacle, and Gonzalez ran into it a few too many times, possibly out of just his confidence. I won't even say overconfidence, but just his confidence in knowing how he wins fights. He ran into that obstacle a few too many times before he figured out how to step around it. So I think this fight is good. If he comes back, he has a very good chance in this fight, having now encountered that once, of destroying that obstacle from the outset or circumnavigating it from the very beginning, rather than having to run into it a few times before he gets there. That's my feeling. So, I agree with you. Gonzalez to the body would be great. Just get the forehead on the side of Rungvisai's head or forehead on the chest and just go like 4 straight uppercuts to the body and then break away. I think that could work very well.
Yeah, I know I'm excited to watch it because their first fight was one of the very best fights in any combat sport of this year. It was a fantastic fight.
Yeah, and it kind of got forgotten really quickly. Like, people are still talking about Ward Kovalev and all the controversies and everything, but in terms of in-the-ring action between elite fighters, Gonzalez Rungvisai was the tits. It was really good. So watch it again if you haven't seen it yet and anticipate the upcoming rematch.
Well, it got overshadowed because Golovkin Jacobs was right afterward, people were like taken aback by the fact that Golovkin didn't finish Jacobs, and it was actually a close fight, and so they kind of forgot that Gonzalez and Sor Rungvisai had like one of the best fights of the year. Yeah,
even though personally, like, Roman Gonzalez having his first loss is a pretty big story to me. Like, that should be a really that should automatically earmark that fight as one that means something.
You like middleweight journeyman, dude.
That's true. Hey, don't equivocate Roman Gonzalez with middleweight journeyman, okay? I won't even allow you to stoop that low.
Various aspects of hipsterdom.
Yes,
my friend.
That's right. The contrarianism is at a source for both fandoms, so that makes sense. Let's talk about Naoya Inoue. He's taking on Antonio Nieves. Not one of the more compelling matchups on the card in terms of competitiveness, because most people, like, unlike the big fight that we just talked about, most people assume Inoue is going to win here, and for good reason. He's a scary motherfucker. He is, as I said just before we started recording, the ideal Japanese fighter, because Japanese boxers tend to, like Korean boxers too, there's some cultural influence in that part of the world, or maybe it's just the training environment, whatever, where these guys tend to come out and they're just maniacs. They are not great defensively. They're not superb technicians, but they put the fight on their opponents. They don't back down. They have insane self-belief, and they will make it a fight. That's what Japanese fans love, so maybe that's the source of the style. Inoue is just a supercharged version of that. He's a little better technically, especially on offense. He hits very hard. He's super athletic. He's just the ultimate Japanese boxer.
He really gets his weight into his punches.
Oh my God.
That's the thing that really stands out, because I haven't watched a lot of Naoya Inoue, at least until I started prepping for us to talk about this. What was really striking to me is he is an athletic puncher. This is something that's come up repeatedly when we were talking about Conor McGregor, and a number of people have asked us what's the difference between athletic power and snappy power. That Conor McGregor has snappy power. Now, I'm saying Naoya Inoue has athletic power because he gets his weight into it. His whole body is moving into the shot. You can see the power and the explosiveness and the speed. And I think the biggest difference between the two is that athletic power seems to move the guys who get hit with it in a way that snappy power really doesn't. Like, you see the effects of snappy power as like second order things. The effect of an athletic power puncher hitting you is that the shot physically moves you.
Yeah, I remember, I know I've mentioned this somewhere, but I don't think it was on Heavy Hands, so it's worth saying here. There was an interview I saw on YouTube with Leroy Caldwell, who was like a journeyman heavyweight boxer, career not very well managed, but this man had the misfortune of fighting both Ernie Shavers and George Foreman in the space of his career. And he was knocked out in the second round by both. And those are like the two big punchers. If we're talking about the hardest hitters ever, Foreman and Shavers tend to come up a lot. And he described the difference between their power. Shavers, I think, is that snappy power, like that sudden acceleration. He described it as a bang, like getting hit with a shotgun when Ernie Shavers would hit you. You didn't see it coming, and when it hit you, it was just lights out, or you were just like blinking stars from your eyes instantly. And he described Foreman's power as a boom, like being hit by a truck, where it doesn't have that same speed, but it just moves you. It's like you can get hit by a car going just 20 miles an hour, and it'll fuck you up because it just has all of that mass geared behind it. I think Inoue has, while he is very fast, he has a little more of that Foreman power. He has that natural ability to just throw his body and his weight into his punches. And you might even compare his style to like a young George Foreman, where he's got a great jab, doesn't focus a lot on being defensive, although he probably can do it better than he reveals. Probably does it in the gym. Like if you watch young George Foreman sparring, he'll go in there and do Ali shit to people, move around, bounce, keep his hands down, not the stuff he did in the ring. So he probably has that technical capability, but Inoue knows that the way he fights best is to walk people down and just put his hands on them. And he keeps his feet kind of close together. He doesn't bounce around a whole lot. Like he just wants to mow people down by landing a good shot. And to that point, the way he puts his punches together, in addition to how much power they carry, is really impressive and it's very clearly intelligently designed. He's got a great jab, which he will double up on, triple up on. He'll feint. He knows exactly how to attack different targets to open up the ones he wants. And so, like Gonzalez, he's a great body puncher with the goal, usually, of turning that into a headshot. But the difference is that Inoue just has huge power. So when he hits you to the body to open up the head, a lot of times you crumple. Inoue over Nieves, right?
Yeah, for sure. So Inoue is a great example of something that we've talked about a little bit recently. I mean, I hate to keep coming back to Mayweather McGregor, but like we talked about a lot of conceptual stuff in that fight that I think is useful for us, like kind of moving forward as things for us to return to. Inoue is a great example of a fighter who has defensive moves, but not a defensive system.
Right.
And like Inoue is really good at slipping a punch and coming back with something really big and hurting you for it. Mm-hmm. He's not good when you come after him with repeated pressure and combinations. Mm-hmm. That if you throw a lot of things at him that he can't pick off one at a time, then you're going to hit him. And basically everybody who has gone after Inoue, who has thrown a lot of punches at him, has been able to hit him because he just kind of waits for you to stop throwing, and then he's going to go right back to coming after you. Mm-hmm. And he's a guy who relies a lot on his really fine pivots and angles and movement through the ring rather than any sort of really complex and layered type of defense to not get hit by you. He basically relies on you not being able to keep up your offense.
Right, yeah. Also kind of like Foreman. Like, again, the footwork is a big part of what makes Inoue so effective. He's not a crude fighter by any measure. He's a puncher who fights like a good puncher. But the way to beat him, we reason, is, as you said, to make him back up, to make him rely on his defense, and to make him, like, the only way he can win that kind of fight is by catching you with a counter. While his chances of doing that are better than a lot of fighters, it's still not the kind of fight in which he's comfortable and in control and doing whatever he wants. Neither of us thinks that Nieves looks like the kind of fighter who can do that. He's not super experienced. He's had back and forth fights with some okay opponents. Like, he's not fighting bums, but he's just kind of a fairly rote boxer puncher. He can be aggressive, but I think typically we'll see that in spurts, and then somebody will back him off and he'll go back to boxing behind his jab. So without that, you got to assume Inoue probably corners him and beats him up before too long.
Yeah, I would say he's got about 12 to 15 minutes.
yeah, maybe.
That's like fourth or fifth round. I think Inoue is going to get to him. Like, I think he's going to hit Inoue because basically everybody manages to hit Inoue at least a little bit. And I think he'll pressure and do so with some success. But this is the problem with boxer punchers who want to pressure, is it's really hard to keep that up for a long period of time because essentially you're fighting against type. You know, you're not doing the things that you're most comfortable doing. And it's really hard to sustain that for a long time. And to beat Inoue that way, you've got to be willing to take the shots he's going to throw back at you and stay in his face.
Right.
And that's really hard to do against a guy who's got that kind of pop. So, yeah, that sounds about right.
That's the difference. Like, Nieves can definitely pressure Inoue in spurts, but when Inoue gets frustrated and just swings on him, he's probably going to back up again. So when you know that's all you really have to do, why not just swing on him whenever he comes forward, right?
Yep.
Okay, on to our final Superfly headliner fight, I guess. Juan Francisco Estrada, El Gallo. One of my favorite bilingual puns ever, Pat. I described Juan Francisco Estrada's jab. I called it Pico de Gallo, the beak of the rooster, because he's El Gallo. I don't know. I thought it was pretty good.
Oh, boy, dude.
Come on, that's a good one. That's good. So El Gallito is taking on Carlos Cuadras. Both of these guys, as I said before, gave Roman Gonzalez very good fights, and Cuadras more recently than Estrada. But Estrada has been the guy for many years, especially since his fight with Gonzalez. People have been saying, these guys are going to meet again. Let's watch him build up to it and see if he can get himself ready to take the win this time. And I think he's been doing good work in that respect. Estrada, I would describe as just, he's like the boxer puncher. He's got the Mexican bruiser flavor to his style. He loves to hunt the body. He loves to fight. He is certainly happy to stand his ground and slug with people. But he has a lot of boxing skill, and he's intelligent enough to know how to pick his spots, how to create the kinds of exchanges he wants. Most of it flows off of an excellent jab. He's got a very tricky left hand, which he will throw in various combinations at various targets, and which he'll also use, like he'll threaten you with it and then pop you with a lead right. He's got those tricky skills from the outside to complement a pretty ferocious pocket and inside boxing game. The one thing I really like about Estrada is that I think he goes into every fight hoping to get stronger as the bout goes on, but making sure that his opponent will slow down. He hunts the body early. He pecks away with the jab. Everything is about keeping that pace up. So I think that Cuadras in this fight, I mean, you saw Cuadras versus Gonzalez pretty recently, Pat. He did surprisingly well in the early going. He had some really good moments. I think he'll probably do the same to El Gallo here. You look at Estrada, he doesn't look like a brilliant defensive fighter. He can definitely be clipped hard early before he's got his reads. So I think Cuadras is going to... Estrada's always happy to mix it up. Cuadras creates that kind of fight. He's got the power to make something interesting happen, but Estrada tends to become a more impressive defensive fighter as his bouts go on. And Roman Gonzalez was the only guy who I've ever seen fight Estrada who was able to just make him scrap the whole time. That's how Roman Gonzalez beat him. It was just a never-ending scrap. And
I think normally Estrada is pretty good at convincing you that the things that you want to do, you're not going to get away with without paying for it.
Right, yeah.
And like, so I'm rewatching his most recent fight against Anwar Salas right now. And it's the first round of the fight. And the first time Salas is throwing every shot that he throws, and this was something that he tried to do to Roman Gonzalez too, if memory serves, he's throwing at the same time. So he's triggered every single time Salas is throwing something. Estrada is throwing a same-time counter, not like a half-beat counter, not waiting until the punch comes. He's throwing it at the same time. And what that does to most fighters over the course of the fight is that it convinces you to stop throwing stuff. It convinces you to stop leading. And as we talked about with building momentum, that gives an aggressive guy who's willing to who's willing to get in and bang with you. It gives them the opportunity to build that momentum as the fight goes along. Yeah,
absolutely. So I like Estrada over Cuadras, but I think it will be a very fun fight. Cuadras, by the way, like he's aside from that win, that loss to Gonzalez, he's been on a pretty impressive run. He beat Richie Mitch Branham, who Estrada also beat. He beat a so-so win over David Carmona in his last fight, but he's a very good fighter. And with 27 of his wins by knockout, I think Estrada is in for maybe a more nail-biting kind of scrap than he's used to. But even Roman Gonzalez was not able to really shake Estrada out of that kind of fight. Like, he still hung with Roman Gonzalez. In fact, if I look at BoxRec, let's see. That fight was scored all over the place. 116, 112 by two of the judges, though. And I think that's about right. And none of the rounds was effortless for Gonzalez. So Estrada's gotten better since then. He's gotten a little more efficient. He's seen a lot more. He knows what it means to fight somebody with that kind of style. So I think we've seen him become a little slicker since then. I like Estrada, although I think it'll probably be a decision. I would be surprised if he put Cuadras away with anything other than a perfect counter.
All I can say is, having talked about these 3 fights, to our listeners who are MMA fans, if you're gonna watch a boxing card, watch this one, because it's gonna be real fun. It's gonna be a lot of the stuff that you like about combat sports in general in a boxing match. All of them contested, I'm pretty sure, at really, really high pace. Like you're gonna see a lot of skill, a lot of pace. Guys throwing with bad intentions. Like, if you're going to give boxing a try this card. You will not. I really doubt that you'll walk away from it feeling like that was a waste of my time.
Absolutely. Okay, well, that about does it for our fight discussion for this episode. Thank you guys for joining us. Before we wrap up, I will give both of us a chance to talk about what we've got coming out this week. Pat?
Big thing is I have a new episode of Tides of History talking about the military revolution between 1350 and 1650. So basically how knights and castles were replaced by pikemen, guys with matchlock muskets and cannon. Basically how that rewrote the battlefield and what that did to society as a whole.
Yeah, presumably like the organizational differences too. It's kind of a move away from feudalism in a sense and towards it's like the new military just got a middle class. It just got a strong middle class.
Yeah, well, it got bigger. There's a saying in political science from a guy named and sociology from a guy named Charles Tilley, who said war made the state and the state made war. So basically, you have all of these emerging state structures, what we recognize as kind of the foundations of our world in terms of taxation and assessment and government powers to organize and spend. Most of that comes from wanting to make war. And when you want to make war on an increasingly large scale, that does things to society as a whole. And so I'm not so much concerned about what happens on the battlefield as I am about what those kinds of changes do to the societies in which wars are embedded. So that's what we're talking about this week. Next week, I'm really excited. I did kind of I wrote a couple of characters. And they're mercenaries, and we would kind of follow their lives and their careers through this military revolution.
Your lifelong dream. You've finally gotten to write some Landsknechts.
I wrote a hell of a Landsknecht, Connor.
I'm excited for that. You guys should check that out. Tides of History has been great so far, and continues to keep improving.
And I'm writing a couple of things on UFC 215. I'm writing for Deadspin, and I'm writing for the Washington Post.
We can see where Pat's priorities lie now. Oh, yeah. By the way, I'm writing about this thing we just spent the whole episode discussing. Tides of History is where it's at, man. That's the bread maker.
That is my bread maker.
For sure. As for me, God, what the hell am I doing this week? Well, one thing I can say for listeners of the show, Kyle McLaughlin, who I love talking to, always have a great time, and is just one of the most knowledgeable boxing heads I know. He also knows a shitload about Muay Thai and is also a very knowledgeable fan of MMA. But his boxing history knowledge is really unparalleled, at least in terms of people that I have spoken to. And he rejoined me for the re-debut of the Historical Perspective, which is a show that we did about 4 episodes of, starting back in 2015. We talked about classic boxers, but also comparing the modern era to previous eras. On this episode, we have decided to somewhat trollishly title it 10 Boxers Greater Than Floyd Mayweather. Kyle runs through his top 10 pound-for-pound rankings of all time, for all of boxing history, and I'm kind of there to add context to it. And basically our goal is to put Floyd Mayweather in the context, in this hall of titans, and figure out where he really sits relative to his peers. He's really close to the very best all-time greats. Not quite there, but I think Kyle put him around 31 to 40 in that range. Pretty good, but you're going to hear why these 10 guys deserve to be ranked well above him. So we had a lot of fun discussing that. That is going to be released for free on the Heavy Hands feed, and then future episodes are going to be for Patreon subscribers, $3 a month. You get all kinds of shit, and we are doing our best to add more things to make that little subscription cost worthwhile. So keep an eye out for that. Also, the 5 other episodes of the Historical Perspective we recorded will be published on the Patreon so that you can access them, because the original feed is no longer active. So if you never got to check out that show in the first place, and you don't even have a reason to be excited that it's coming back, then check out those episodes on Patreon. Other than that, we'll just let the other Should I'm doing appear, as it will, just keep an eye out for the historical perspective with Kyle MacLachlan. 10 fighters greater than Floyd Mayweather. And that is it for us. Check us out on social media. Pat is at Patrick_Wyman. I am at Boxing Bush, BUSCH, both of those on Twitter, of course. You can also find us both on Facebook using the same formula for our URLs. Pat is facebook.com/PatrickWymanMMA, and I am facebook.com/Conor Ruebusch MMA. And also, we should be saying this on this podcast, if you're listening to us on iTunes or whatever, reviews, ratings, that shit is good. It helps other people find the show. So if you guys haven't, if you're new to the show or you've been listening a long time and never got around to it, please, if you have a moment, take that moment to give us a nice rating and review on iTunes or anywhere else you find this show, just to let other people know what we're doing here and also just how good you think it is. Thank you all for joining us. That's it. The wrap-up is finally concluded. And if you all came here today for the finer points of face punching, you definitely came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.